Before we get too far into making music, I want to talk about the channel settings window and the sampler. The channel settings window is what pops up whenever you left-click on the channel button. It basically gives us some editable parameters for that channel. These options can change depending on what type of channel we have inserted. For instance, if I have a sampler inserted, the first selection in the channel settings window is going to be for the sample I've loaded. But if it's a soft synth, the first selection item will say plugin, and clicking on it will open the plugin interface for that particular plugin. You'll also notice that the sampler contains options for instrument properties and the soft synth does not. We'll go over the properties as we take a look at the sampler. We also see a miscellaneous option, which will give us some options for levels, polyphony, and retriggering, and then a special tools and functions option, which includes our arpeggiator and some time adjustment features. Again, we'll cover these as we go along in the sampler. The last thing to point out about each channel settings window is the top area. This is again where you can adjust channel volume and panning as well as pitch. You can also adjust the amount of semitones that the pitch can be adjusted by. To the right of all of this, we have a very important feature. This area is where you assign a channel to the mixer. You can left-click this area and drag up or down to select a mixer track. Once you have selected the mixer track you want this channel assigned to, you can always double-click this number to open up the mixer on the specific track. You have up to 64 tracks to use for assignment. One thing to point out, when you begin a project, oftentimes the first channel you insert is automatically assigned to mixer track 1. You can simply change this upon starting the program, or you can try to avoid using mixer track 1 altogether. If you start playing your project and things don't sound right, you can always make sure that you have your channels assigned to the correct mixer tracks. It's amazing how much trouble one channel assigned to the wrong track can cause, so always make sure to double check your mixer track assignments. So now that we've had an overview of the channel settings window, we'll dive a bit deeper into its functions as well as also discuss the sampler. A sampler is basically an audio player. All it does is play samples or audio clips. Today's samplers are very sophisticated and go far beyond simply playing an audio clip. FL Studio is no exception, and as a virtual sampler can be very useful in creating your music. To start, we'll look at the easiest and most common use for the sampler, which is drums. Drum hits can be assigned to a sampler, and then we can lay out patterns using either the step sequencer or the piano roll. For this example, I'm going to drag some drum hits to the channel windows. You'll notice how each time I drag a wave sample to the channel window, a new sampler is inserted with a copy of that particular drum hit. So here I have a kick, a snare, and a hi-hat. To make this easy, we'll just draw out a simple pattern using the step sequencer. As I play this pattern, you'll see how each step lights up as it's played. You can use practically any audio sample in basically any standard Windows or Mac format, such as WAV, MP3, or AIF. You can also use REX files from Recycle or OGG Vorbis format. For a full list of compatible files, you can view the help file by pressing F1. Another way to load a sample is to right-click on the sampler channel and choose Load Sample. Yet another way is to left-click on the folder icon in the sample properties of the channel settings. Here, you will see a list of other current and recently used samples. Something to keep in mind regarding the sampler. If you don't have the Cut Itself option selected, the sample will play in its entirety. This means that if you have a sample that plays for 8 beats, but your settings are for 4 beats, the sample will begin to overlap itself, causing all kinds of volume changes and phasing issues. Pay attention to the Cut Itself option and make sure that your samples or loops are not causing unnecessary noise by overlapping themselves. If this becomes a problem, just left-click on the sampler channel and make sure that the Cut Itself option is checked. You can see by right-clicking on the channel, we have our options which were discussed in the channel window tutorial. So that's all pretty straightforward. Now I want to take a look at our sampler channel settings window and discuss the controls that are specific to the step sequencer, as well as the channel settings window in general, so that you can have a better understanding of the tools available to you. We've discussed how to load a sample, and below that we have the options to stream the sample from disk, which is good if you're using a long sample and you don't want to take up as much memory. We also have an option to upsample to mixing frequency, which is determined by the mixing frequency you selected in the settings and options. And then we have two options to load markers if you're using a sample that was saved in ACID or REX format. We also have the option for using loop points, if any exist, and also ping-ponging these points. Basically, loop points are points in the sample that are inserted either using Edison or a third-party program like Sony's ACID to tell FL Studio where the loop begins. What happens with this option turned on is that the sample will play from the beginning, and once it reaches the end of the sample, playback will begin from the starting loop point. This is useful if you have, for instance, a string sample where a note is played for a shorter amount of time than you would like. You can use the loop points to hold out a sample indefinitely, as the loop points can keep playing the middle of the sample. The direct wave sampler works like this, which we'll discuss in a later tutorial. The ping-pong option will just play backwards and forwards in between the loop points as long as the note is held. Below this, we have some time stretching tools. Here, you can control the pitch, the multiplier, the time, and the stretching method. Time stretching is a bit complicated, and you may need to take some time to play around with these settings to get them just right, but you can right-click on the time control and choose Auto Detect to use FL Studio's powerful tempo detection tool. Below this, we have some pre-computed effects such as normalization and reverse. When you choose one or more of these effects, the effect will begin working on the sample immediately in real time, but does not affect the original sample. You can also see that we have some further controls below that, which give us options for fading in or out the sample, as well as a pitch bend effect. The crossfade loop creates a crossfade within the loop to allow for loop points to be used, and trim silence threshold works sort of like a gate, which cuts out any silent portion of the sample so that the system RAM doesn't use as much resource. Lastly, we have some other pre-computed effects. Now again, these can be turned on and off in the Settings and Options menu as we discussed earlier. These are legacy effects, which include reverb and delay, as well as some filter and distortion effects. At the very bottom, we see the actual waveform of the sample. You can left-click on this window to preview the sample, or you can right-click on it to have some options to reload, edit, save the new sample, detect tempo, and view properties. You can also change the display to a spectrum view, and you can also choose to view the waveform in multi-channel mode if available. Next, we have the instrument properties, which gives us attack, decay, sustain, and release envelopes for volume, cut, resonance, and pitch. To activate an envelope, just left-click on the little icon beside the word time, and that envelope will be in use. We can also adjust the tension of each envelope by left-clicking TNS. You will see the envelope change to purple. To change back, just click on time. Tempo-based time allows the envelopes to change based on the tempo of the project. If the TB button is selected, you can then right-click on the envelope controls, and under the word Set, you can select different preset beat-based times. This is great for getting your modulation locked in with your project. Below this, we have our LFO, which can be selected as a sine, a triangle, or a square shape. We have controls for speed, time, pre-delay, and amount, as well as the tempo-based time switch and a global LFO switch. The global LFO setting means that the LFO is applied globally and does not begin again with each note pressed. If it is left off, the LFO starts over on each note. We also have a filter to the right, which can be set to a number of different settings and then modulated using the X and Y controls. The X represents the cutoff frequency, and the Y modulates the resonance. Then finally, at the bottom, we have our virtual keyboard, which is where you can preview sounds, as well as set the root note and keyboard regions if needed. To set the root note, which is by default C5, you can right-click above your note of choice and a bright yellow-orange square will appear above it. To draw out a region, you can left-click and drag and an opaque orange band appears. These notes represent the notes that you will be able to play for that particular channel. The next set of options we have in the channel settings window is the miscellaneous settings. To begin, we have duplicates of the channel volume and panning controls and a set of filters. The reason for the duplication is that this volume knob actually reaches 200%, so you can raise the initial volume even higher before sending to the mixer. When we're talking about the cut and cut by options, we're talking about cutoff, meaning does this channel get cut off if something else starts to play, or does this channel cut off another channel when this one starts to play? The way to use this function is to choose to either have this channel cut off another channel, or to choose to have this one cut. An example is a hi-hat part. The number that we're selecting here in the cut display is a number assigned to each channel by order of insertion. You can also figure out what the number of the channel is by choosing cut itself. Whatever that number is that comes up is the number of the channel. So the first channel we inserted is 1, the second channel is 2, and so on. If we have a closed hi-hat sound on 1 and an open sound on 2, and we would want sound 1 to cut sound 2, we would want sound 2 to be cut by sound 1. This creates an open-closed hi-hat sound. You can also choose to have a sound be cut off by itself. We also have options for polyphony below this. You can change the number of voices you want to allow to be played at once. You can also choose portamento to allow for slides between notes while pressing different keys on the keyboard. Monophonic means each note will cut off the previous one, and no more than one note can be played at a time. You can also adjust the portamento time. Finally, we can have the current channel not affected by the project main pitch, which might be neat to use for maybe all the drum tracks or all the synths, and then do a quick pull down on the main pitch on a track, leaving all of the instruments in the drums or synths unaffected while dropping the pitch of everything else for a split second. This is also useful if you need to adjust the master pitch in order to fit a specific sample. When the Add to Key option is on, the root key works by offsetting the keyboard, including all key range specific options. So when you set the root key to C6 when it is normally C5, and you play C6, it's exactly as if you played C5 with root key C5. With this option off, only the pitch is offset, and the rest of the features remain as if they were with the default root key. So if in the previous example you set the Add to Key option off, playing C6 will result in hearing a C5 tone, but with the samples and properties that are mapped to C6. This feature makes no difference for generators that have single sample and properties along with the whole keyboard. However, it will act differently when used with the generators like the Fruity SoundFont 2 player or the Fruity Slicer generator, because different samples may be assigned to different keys. Finally, we have a reset button for the root note and key properties, as well as the fine-tuning knob. The last window we have is the Special Tools and Functions window, which gives us a delay at the top. You can think of this delay as always being on in that in order to hear it, you just need to turn up the feedback knob. You also have options for panning, cutoff frequency and resonance, pitch time, as well as the ability to set the number of echoes. You can also have a ping-pong mode, which sends the delay back and forth between the speakers, and fat mode, which creates a slight delay that goes back and forth between the speakers to create a fatter sound. You can also access some presets by left-clicking the arrow beside the delay. Below this, we have the arpeggiator, which is a great tool to play with. An arpeggiator simply takes a chord, and instead of playing all the notes at the same time, it plays the notes in succession. We have different options for off, up, down, bounce, and then up, down, sticky, which plays the bottom and top notes twice as well as random. Below that, you can adjust the time either manually or by right-clicking and choosing a tempo-based time. There's also a gate function which can be neat to play with using automation. Furthermore, we have the slide function, which slides notes in the arpeggio. Now, the way the arpeggiator works is this. You select a chord from the drop-down menu. If you use Auto or Auto Sustain, the program will attempt to automatically figure out the chord. If it's a single note, the arpeggiator will just play that note in different octaves. So we'll select a chord to play, and then select a range of octaves. For this, I'll select 2. The repeat function will repeat the arpeggiated notes. Then we select a direction setting, and we're ready to go.
Now, when we play our note or sample, it's arpeggiated. This can yield some really awesome and some really bizarre results, so definitely spend some time getting acquainted with the arpeggiator. The last two sections to look at involve another gating effect and keyboard tracking.
The gate effect will cut off notes when they surpass the time you set the gate for. This has nothing to do with the arpeggiator gate. This gate is controlled by the time passed after a note has been played. You can right-click this control to set a tempo-based value. The fine note offset delays the beginning of the note up to a 16th of a note after you press the key. The last section, the keyboard tracking area, allows you to set up keyboard tracking based on the note you're hitting. Lower notes, as in lower in pitch, low notes on the keyboard, can give you a lower value, while notes higher on the scale would be given a higher value. This is only if you're using keyboard tracking for this channel. We'll talk a little bit more about keyboard tracking later, but for now, just know that it means you're using your keyboard keys to control actions. Oh, and one last thing I forgot to mention. Up in the top left-hand corner of each channel settings window, you'll see an arrow icon. If you left-click it, a menu appears giving us the option to save this channel state, which is great if you find an LFO or other setting that you like and you want to be able to use it in the future. You can also assign to a free mixer track here, which is a great time-saving tool. This is also where you can rename the channel. So we've taken a look at using the sampler, as well as the channel settings window and the sampler channel parameters. Don't worry if you're not getting all of this right away. It's a lot to take in, and you'll probably want to play around a bit and then come back to watch this video again. I want to be as in-depth as possible so that you can fully experience FL Studio. You'll find that you're not going to be using all of the tools provided, and some you'll probably even forget are there. But if you start out knowing what everything is and what it does, you'll have a much easier and faster time creating your projects, and you'll have access to tools that most people overlook. In upcoming videos, we're going to start taking a look at some other tools for creating and editing our music, as well as how to use effects. Thanks again for watching.